Starscream! All hail Starscream! I can't hear you!
Everyone knows Starscream, but do you realize how bad he actually is? And not just to the Autobots. Let's take a look at his deeds, his most sadistic, but also his most sentimental, his successes, his failures, his betrayals, his backstab. Also the times he's got distorted into some kaiju-sized freak beast. He's been an anime girl, he's been a monkey, he spiked everyone's drinks, he raised a ghost army, he sold out his whole species, he tried to kill Megs with a pony. Decepticon! There's so much stuff in this video, I ruined my voice, broke my rib, and my dog speaks to me in Latin now. I'm joking, she's fine. She's got a baguette. She's happy. But please hit like and subscribe if you're new. And let's start with the Skybound comics for a change, who have him portrayed as particularly brutal. Shooting B in the face, squishing humans with his bare hands, ordering that his own troops be stripped of their energon. He kicked Ravage like he was kicking a field goal. And shooting one of his best friends, Jetfire, in the abdomen. And then blowing him out of the sky. They managed to revive him, but he was left blind and unable to transform out of his vehicle mode. In fact, unable to move at all. Now this is especially poignant when later in the comics we see the new origin that Skybound gave Starscream. So, like in the Unicron trilogy, he was originally called Ulftar, and he wasn't interested in the war at all. He literally wouldn't kill a bug. He had a friend called Genvo who tried to talk him into joining up with the Decepticons. But when Genvo was killed, Ulftar saw who was responsible and developed an instant hatred of the Autobots. And of course Megatron was there to steer that hatred to the benefit of the cons. But it's how he chose his name that I thought was really awesome. Now, I always thought that it was because he was a jet, so he would scream through the stars. You know, it was a reference to his jet engine and his speed, but it's actually a reference to something they would do as friends. Now, these three would hang out under the flight path of the Omega Guardians, and they'd wave and stuff, but these guys are so big they wouldn't even notice them. But as it was their last day together before they all went separate ways, Ulftar blew up this huge bomb and managed to get his attention. Luckily, the Omega Guardian was like, hello, and not, my granddad lived in that neighborhood. Then later, when Genvo lay dying, he said that his friend was the bot who yelled at the gods and screamed at the stars. And so he told Megatron that from this point forward, he would be known as Starscream, a name that was an homage to the friendship he once knew, and a declaration that he would refuse to go unnoticed. Okay, on to the Marvel comics now, and let's start with the time he started a war between two major cities, two major population centers that ended in huge amounts of death and destruction. This was a story told in one of the Marvel annuals where he managed to get leadership of the city of Voss and try to engineer a war between the city of Tarn and the Autobot city of Iacon. When that didn't work out for whatever reason, he thought screw it and nuked Iacon from his own city. Iacon fired nukes at Voss in return, and both cities were nearly leveled. He managed to pin the blame for the whole thing on Iacon and the Autobots, radicalizing many survivors to the Decepticon cause. Then he tried to murder Ravage. Yet Ravage overheard one of his monologues about overthrowing Megs.
A word of advice? Stop thinking aloud.
So Ravage had to go. He messed it up though. He did hit him with a rocket but failed to kill him. So he was caught and demanded a trial by combat. So Megs threw him in with Brawn, who I think had been mind controlled at the time. Impressively, he managed to beat Brawn. Don't forget, Brawn is pretty hardcore, even though you wouldn't necessarily know it from his Marvel design. Look at this guy. Look at his leg. But Ravage did not forget and blasted him out of the sky. And Megatron had a good old laugh about it. See these flyboys in their crisp uniforms just doing their jobs, defending their country while their families wait safely at home? Well, Starscream melted the flesh from their bones. Then he casually tried to steal all of the knowledge in the universe. I am, of course, talking about the Underbase. Basically, every Transformer had a kind of mind link with this thing and uploaded all of its knowledge. Like I said, all of the knowledge in existence. It said that the combined power of all of this knowledge could detonate a star on impact. Don't know how that works. I guess knowledge gets really hot when there's too much of it in one place, you know? Maybe. And even being in proximity to a planet can scorch the entire planet. Starscream was like, humana. So he started this whole Game of Thrones style series of schemes, manipulations, and machinations. He played Scorponok up against Ratbat, and that allowed him to kidnap and escape with Buster Witwicky, flying him to the Arctic and dumping him there, leaving him to freeze to death. This baited the Autobots into coming to save him.
He didn't even give him a snood.
And the Decepticons were waiting, and that created a whole battle. All of this confusion was just to allow Starscream to go and find the Underbase for himself. He started absorbing the power like, he was interrupted pretty quick, but he still managed to absorb enough to give him insane powers. He set about wiping New York clean off the map. But Prime baited him. He was like,
would you look at that? There's still some power in this Underbase box drinky thing. Oh, and here's a straw.
Don't just get it now.
But there was just too much power for his tiny little mind to handle, and it blew him into pieces. He managed to survive that though. I mean, if you call this surviving, I mean, look at the state of that. Wow. Perhaps because of his immortal spark, and immediately went on a murder spree, in particular trying to get his kill on with this archaeologist called Susan Hoffman, before having what was left of the Underbase's power drained out of him by Dreadwind and Darkwing, reducing Starscream to a pile of rusting garbage. He was mind-wiped and rebuilt as a pretender with a form that all the other bots thought was a ghost and ran away from. They realized what was going on though, and Starscream ended up groveling back to Scorponok for forgiveness. Then Shockwave took command, so it was time to overthrow him. He heard that GB Blackrock had a new robot-killing weapon, so he convinced Shockwave to let him go and destroy it. But you guessed it, he only wanted to steal the weapon to use it on him. But then Megatron showed up, so it was time to backstab him again. So he shot Megatron in the back at the worst possible time, right in the middle of his fight with Galvatron. But Galvatron stopped him from killing Megs outright. Yeah, Galvatron was from the future, so if Megatron died, Galvatron would never have come into existence. Ouch. He got told he'd never be anything more than battle fodder by Soundwave when he took leadership. Ouch. He tried to brainwash Bumblebee by implanting this massive cylindrical thing in there. Is there room in his head for that? I mean, at least they painted it yellow so that it would match. Then he had his personality reversed and couldn't stop apologizing for everything. He began questioning the whole point of the war and exclaimed that they needed to give peace a chance. But even this kinda more moderate version of Starscream still talked about overthrowing Megatron. He then tried to overthrow Scorponok by making an alliance with Shockwave, planning to overthrow Shockwave after that to take power for himself. But his plan was interrupted when all of the bots were teleported back to Cybertron by Primus to fight Unicron, and he and Shockwave made the logical decision to run away and hide. So they stole a ship. On that ship was Megs, or hey Megs, and Starscream groveled before being called pathetic by Shockwave. It was kind of pathetic though. He tried to kill Ratchet, guess how? By shooting him in the back, that's how. If you know Transformers, you know that Ratchet is a fucking badass. But Ratchet managed to deflect the shot into one of the Nucleon tanks, which pretty much blew up the whole ship. Again, serves him right. After he got pissed off that Shockwave was reducing his responsibilities, he found and incapacitated Megatron's spies, the Insecticons, and then bullied them into feeding some select information back to old Buckethead, basically giving him Shockwave's location so that he would go and kill him. Next step was blackmailing Soundwave into falling in under his command. All while Shockwave and Megatron battled it out. But just to make sure the winner of this fight didn't come back and kick his ass, he tipped the Autobots off, who came in hot to take them both out. Then he spoke about taking Soundwave out later. He threw a human in front of a heat-seeking missile to avoid taking the blast himself. Sploosh. I'm not sure what kind of noise that would make. The guy did have kind of a sus name though, you know, Zeke Heilemann. In Gen 2, the emergence of G-Axis and his super army prompted Megs to ally with the Autobots, so Screamy hedged his bets to cozy up with G-Axis to try and mooch a position of power in his new empire, but even that was a scam. What he actually wanted to do was to board this massive space war machine called the Warworld to steal a vessel containing the creation juice that Megs had slurped out of Opie just a few issues earlier. I don't know if he meant to do this, but the energies ended up fusing him together with the ship, turning him into this fucking thing who could morph, shape, and manifest anything his mind could come up with, creating this horrific living maze of torment for Megs and Opie. Later though, he found that the energies were having a positive influence on him and urging him to do stupid things like be a hero and save the day. But Screamy didn't want to risk his own bacon, so he was like, fuck that, here, take it all back, baby. He turned back to his normal self and would have got a slapping from Megs for this betrayal, but the greater threat called the Swarm showed up and the whole thing got swept under the rug. He was seen helping hand out this stuff called Rheanium that would protect the Autobots from the Swarm's corrosive touch. All you had to do is pour it all over your boobs. And he even pulled Opie to safety with a tractor beam, so maybe the powers of Primus changed him for the better after all. In the Classics lines, he tried to cozy up to a bot called Bugbite against Megatron, but Bugbite tagged Starscream and his guys with Cerebro shells to control their treacherous little minds, and it was only because of Autobot jamming signals that they managed to get free. Then there was the time he tried to overthrow Galvatron with the help of Shockwave. So this was in Regeneration 1, which followed up from the whole Underbase saga. Here, Megs returned and reanimated his whole army as mindless zombies. He loved it because he got to control pretty much their every movement. Apart from Starscream, that is, who he allowed a tiny monochrome of consciousness and free will so that he would continuously suffer the knowledge of his diminished position. It really was just to humiliate him. So he told Kup that it was because of Megs' prior mind linking with Ratchet, whose severed head had been made into a figurehead for Megatron's newest and coolest battle vehicle. Yes, the Battle Sleigh. That it was because of this mind link that he was able to reanimate the whole army, and by killing Ratchet, it severed the mind link and gave Optimus an opening to snuff his spark out. and the zombie army dropped down dead. Then he got thrown in a mass grave with all the other zombies, but luckily he jumped out before the Autobots nuked it from space. That's when Galvatron showed up and started following him around and bullied him into finding the Ark and Shockwave's head. Shockwave started to get his faculties back, and so did Starscream, so they joined forces to first set a Guardian droid on Galvatron, but obviously Galvatron's armor was just too thick, then tried to blast him out of an airlock, but obviously he can breathe in space, or does he breathe at all? I don't know. Which is it? Then they turned this huge cannon on him, a cannon that was usually used for blasting asteroids out of the way, but he missed. So he tucked his tail, turned, and fled. But this dastardly duo would ultimately decide to prioritize protecting Cybertron from Bludgeon's forces. So once again, perhaps showing a streak of goodness in there. Then G-Axis showed up again and attacked, and Starscream got possessed by the Underbase, traveled to G-Axis' hub network, which is basically his supervillain layer, where the Underbase pulled G-Axis' mind right out of his body, before dumping Starscream into a heap. And lo and behold, it was Shockwave who saw his self-sacrifice and pulled him out of the base as it was crumbling around them, before all three of them withdrew from the war and traveled the galaxy as ambassadors of peace. Quick spot check, ladies and gents, just to make sure you're all subscribed, because 80% of people who watch my channel aren't. So I'd love it if you considered hitting that button. It really helps the channel keep going. Cheers. The G1 version always seemed like a younger version of the character to me, always doing all this juvenile crap that cost the cons big time. Like in the very first episode, he petulantly shot the crashed Ark for no reason, causing Optimus to get jolted into Teletran 1's resuscitation beam that brought him back to life, and he brought the other bots back to life. Had Starscream not done this, the cons get free reign and probably take Earth. Then when Megs was about to send Opie to his death when he was dangling there and Megs was standing on his hands, it was Starscream firing his wrist rocket that caused an explosion that forced Megs to stumble, allowing Prime back into the fight. Then he used up a stockpile of Energon that the cons had gone to great lengths to gather. Why? To shoot the tops off these mountains. Admittedly, probably great fun. He came off as kind of deluded as well, never really having any reason why he'd make the best leader. Like, if he'd come out with, "I won the Battle of Iacon," the cons might have taken him more seriously, but the way it was, he came off kind of annoying. So that led to him being constantly slapped down and degraded, being called a dribbling dirt bucket and stuff, which in turn would lead to him, on many an occasion, trying to kill Megatron. Like this famous example where he ended up on his knees begging for his life. Megatron gave him a pass this time, which was clearly a mistake as he tried another coup in the very same ep. And all that did was detracted the other cons from the fact that Mirage snuck on board their ship and crippled it. And Starscream's little escapade meant that it ended up crashing to the ocean floor. He took a terrified Reflector and bullied him into the highly dangerous task of transporting Energon through a space bridge. And then he blackmailed Thundercracker when Thundercracker tried to blackmail him. Yeah, Starscream overheard Thundercracker talking about how they should let Skyfire destroy the Con's new weapon, so he bullied him into obeying his every command, and if he didn't, he would snitch to Megsy. Then, in one ep that I find particularly nightmarish, he abducted Dr. Arkeville, who admittedly was kind of evil too, and pressured him into building a device called the Exponential Generator, which would destroy Earth and turn it into a huge energy source to fuel Cybertron. In the process, he threatened to crush him, to stomp on him, then kidnapped him and whisked him away to Cybertron. And when Dr. Arkeville tried to stop his plan, Starscream forced Shockwave and a bunch of mechadroids to subject him to unnecessary surgery. He already did have some cybernetic implants, but nothing like this. Oh my god. Starscream went back to Earth to feel Megatron's wrath. Dr. Arkeville was just kind of forgotten about on Cybertron, like, what the fuck, man? He took a backhand in the face, not once, not twice. Well, yeah, twice, but he got bollocked a bunch of times as well. In this one, for example, all the cons were going after these humans, and Starscream was like, okay, we're killing humans, let's kill some humans, but Megs was like, no! It was genuinely like no one had told him that this was a capture mission. Same here. There was a battle with the Autobots and Starscream was like, oh, we're killing Autobots, let's kill... Megs was like, no, that's not my plan. Why don't you share your plan better then? But in the same ep, he did make Gears into his own personal slave and nearly wiped out Megatron's solar needle device. Then there was the time Megatron tested his new weapon on him, removing his ability to transform. Kind of fucked up, you know? That's kind of like declawing a cat.
No, Megatron! You can't mean to!
He recognized all the signs of a traitor in the Fish King Nurgle. He did save Megatron when the Nurgle tried to shoot him with a disruptor ray. And how did Megatron thank him? By calling him a dribbling dirt bucket. And he got jealous when Megs threatened to appoint Nightbird as his number 2.
Replace me? Never!
So after he escaped the cage that Megatron put him in, he helped out the Autobots and then blasted her with his null ray. He put on an Optimus costume to frame the Autobots for stealing Energon. That got them booted off the planet. And he also made a clone of himself at one point to help sell the fact that Megatron had made a copy of Prime. The plan was to have the Prime clone kill the Starscream clone to convince the Autobots. When Red Alert was vulnerable because he had his logic chips fried and got paranoid that the Autobots were against him, Starscream stepped in, was like, "I'm your friend." All to get control of a device called the Negavator, which would allow him to control the rest of the cons. This was probably revenge for the other cons abandoning him earlier in the ep.
What about Starscream? Leave him! We have more important things to worry about.
Before being exiled again. This one escalated pretty hard, starting with Starscream shooting Megatron in the back. Again, yay! Starscream grovels. Megatron banishes Starscream in retaliation, causing Starscream to create the Combaticons in retaliation, and Bruticus. And he used them to overthrow Megatron, briefly. Until the Stunticons turned up, formed Menasor, Starscream groveled to Megatron again, and Megatron banished Starscream again. Yay! Of course, he couldn't wait to throw Megatron out with the trash in the 86 movie, threw himself a little coronation party to satisfy his ego, and returned as a ghost after Galvatron turned him to dust. The ghost possessed Cyclonus and conspired with future pornographer Octane to hand Galvatron over to Rodimus Prime. So they set up a trap, Galvatron escaped and blasted the crap out of Cyclonus, while Starscream just hopped to another body. Then he possessed Scourge, and you guessed it, shot Galvatron. He figured that Scourge would be chucked out of the faction for being a traitor, and he'd have no option but to help Starscream's plan. The plan being to reactivate Unicron. Great idea. Basically, he thought that Unicron would give him his body back, but of course, he wanted Metroplex's eyes and Trypticon's T-Cog in exchange. Long story short, Unicron granted him a body, only for our boy to do what he does best, and ran away without completing his side. But before he could get away altogether, the Autobots blew the place to all holy hell, and both of them were sent rolling into the void of space. He got a taste of his own medicine in the Legends comics when Slugslinger was about to get the title of Air Commander over him, and when he protested, Slugslinger overthrew both him and Megs. He perplexingly stated that the best body he'd ever possessed was Waspinator's. We went to possess him again. Guess this was an attempt to control Metroplex, like in IDW, where Waspinator randomly ended up being able to control the Titan. In the Battle of the Stargate manga, he agreed to protect Japan, but then created a bunch of earthquakes that damaged loads of infrastructure. Then he tried to scam himself. Yeah, a future version of himself came back through time and roped him into this scheme to ensure his own survival. And long story short, the future Starscream unwillingly fused present Starscream with a human-built teleportation system called the Trigger, and he became this monstrosity. And in this form, he threatened to suck all of the Transformers into a black hole. He scammed himself again in the E-Hobby comics. After he was killed by Galvatron in the 86 movie, he woke up in limbo with a bunch of other versions of himself, obviously from different timelines. And some of these guys have seen better days. Don't know what happened to this guy, and this guy's carrying his own head. They sat around a while before using their scientific skills to create this crystal to get him out of there. But of course, they all started squabbling over it before our guy nommed it and went back to the real world. When he got there, he was Ghost Starscream, but he was really, really, really big. He possessed an anime girl while she was using the toilet. Yes, the wonderful world of Kiss players, ladies and gents. Luna Club begged him to possess her, and when he refused, she tried to kill him. Megatron forced him to be in one of Octane's videos with Luna Club. Dream come true for her, because remember, Octane was a literal pornographer in this one. In Japan, you can get away with some shit, man. I mean, look at this. They're like filming her from, you know, behind, and then there's the reverse. We're gonna have to blur this out on YouTube, but basically she doesn't have the thong on anymore, and there's this kind of like a cylinder with all these lines coming out from a central point. Oh, fuck it, I'll just say it's an anus. It's definitely an anus. He got betrayed again by young Jenny. Basically, he was going to kill her, but she was like, waddles. So he was like, oh, okay. But she implanted some kind of device on him and detonated a bunch of his chest missiles. Then there was a whole betrayal salad in super robot life forms. Basically, the Quintessence made this powerful drone unit called Giltor, derived from OP's and Megs' blueprints, and allowed Starscream's ghost to possess it. But as soon as he was in it, he ditched the Quintessence and joined up with Galvatron, with Starscream feigning injury at the first possible opportunity and stabbing Rodimus in the back. Then, just as Galvatron was like, good, he turned on Galvatron and started beating him. So Rodimus and Galvatron joined up together and kicked the crap out of Starscream. Wings Universe explained that back when he was studying at the Science Academy, he only rose to the top of his class by wrecking other students' projects and pitting them against each other, of course. After that, he fell in under Deathsaurus, but quickly switched allegiances to Megatron as soon as he showed up. Oh, in this one, he also stole a bot called Cannonball's body. Yeah, he kicked his spark out of his metal carcass so that Starscream's ghost could get nice and cozy in it, leaving Cannonball shit out of luck, I guess. In the Dreamwave comics, his favorite thing to do was to wind up Grimlock, winding Grimmy up so much that he would explode and beat the hell out of his fellow combatants, like Maul here. Starscream just did this for a laugh. Later, when Megs and Opie called truce and went to talk it out on top of this bridge, Starscream snuck along and could not hold himself back from blowing the bridge up and trying to off them both. And with Megs out of action, he took control of the comms, much to the displeasure of Shockwave. He then ordered Motormaster to forcibly extract information from Laserbeak, so that pissed off Soundwave, no doubt, before this whole plan to remodel the entire surface of Cybertron the way he wanted it, using these things at the core of the planet called planetary engines. He was advised by Scrapper that the process wasn't ready and Cybertron would be destroyed if he did it. He did it anyway, and Screamy threatened to have Motormaster rip Scrapper limb from limb, so Scrapper agreed and hit the button. Luckily, Megs and Opie stopped arguing with each other long enough to destroy the planetary engines, and Mr. Scream made a hasty getaway. He assassinated the Senate because he thought that's what Megs wanted, and ended up in a Piranacon tank when Megs decided that he wanted to kill them himself. In these here novels, he got control of the city of Las Vegas. And renamed it New Centurion, manipulating the residents to believe it was the cons who were here to protect them. Then Shockwave showed up with an army of triple changers, so Starscream cozied up to him until he figured out that Shockwave was trying to mind control them all, that is, using these pods called CR chambers. Starscream managed to slither out of his, grabbed Megs out of his and threw him out the airlock, then tortured Soundwave just because he was Shocky's teacher's pet at the time. He released the Stunticons to go on a diversionary rampage, murdered the Reflector triplets to impair his observational capabilities, and then let the Autobots into Shockwave space so that they could kill Shockwave for him. He ordered Bruticus to squeeze Jazz to death, well, into unconsciousness anyway, and was about to get the Brutal Combiner to rip into the unconscious bodies of Jazz, Wheeljack, Wheelcharger, Sunstreaker, and Sidewipe, and it's only because they realized that Brawn and Ratchet were missing that they didn't. That's when his clone, Sunstorm, showed up, so Starscream ran away, abandoning his own troops. Jetfire saved him from Sunstorm. Then when Omega Supreme showed up, Starscream helped his so-called brother by destroying an energy siphon that Jetfire had attached to him to weaken him, only to have Sunstorm take him to this religious seal in the ground and demand Starscream open it. Jetfire and B showed up to stop this happening, and Starscream then switched on Sunstorm. Of course, Sunstorm wasn't dead, and Jetfire managed to get enough of a handle on him to fly him into space. He then reluctantly agreed to risk his own life to save Bumblebee. Once he was safe, Bumblebee begged him to go help Jetfire, but Screamy refused, leaving Jetfire to fucking explode. To the Movieverse! And all its little spin-offs! So first off, he cut through these F-22s like a knife through butter. And I saw a rumor online somewhere that after this, he went and hid amongst the other F-22s to strike Megatron. That'd be pretty funny if it was true. Before later fleeing the Battle of Mission City. He failed in attempting to build a new Decepticon army because there wasn't enough Energon to nurse the hatchlings. He failed in helping to beat Optimus. In fact, his arm got ripped off and used as a club against him. But I think the worst one is shooting down Sentinel's ship in Dark of the Moon, which might seem like a great success. It might seem like something Megatron would want, you know, taking out the leader of the Autobots and all, but it actually turned out that Sentinel was on his way to defect and make his deal with Megatron, a deal that Megatron considered his greatest triumph. I guess the only reason Megs wasn't more pissed at Starscream for doing this was that he got stuck in the Arctic anyway. He almost cut Sam to pieces before getting shot in the eye and then having his head exploded by Boomstick before his head came to rest at Cade Yeager's junkyard in the last night. And in a rare moment where Megs showed that he actually missed Screamy Baby, Megs said that the end was near and that he wished that he was here to see it. In the Foundation comics, Starscream jumped in to save a bunch of hatchlings. They were just out on a school trip when they were attacked by a driller. He kind of failed at this too, and Megs and Shockwave had to come in and help him out. But Megs sees enough fight in Starscream to suggest he join up with the security services. This scene is interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, it's Shocky's first encounter with Driller and shows that it's like a domesticated wild animal. Secondly, a couple of things they say is that there are multiple of these things and they're kind of like a pest or like a kaiju or something that keep attacking their cities. And lastly, Starscream helping kids? Okay. He murdered this guy in cold blood. A guy who was just asking for help. These guys who he promised he wouldn't kill if they set Frenzy free, and then he killed them anyway. Oh yeah, and this guy got dropped from altitude and then caught again. Starscream put him in his cockpit, flew him up into space, where he popped all over the inside of his canopy, I guess due to the pressure differences, before ripping out Dreadwing Spark and tossing it aside like a cheap trinket at a thrift store, when he tried to mount an insurrection against Starscream's leadership. In the Titan movie comics, he reanimated the dead. Yeah, in Megatron's absence, he found that he wouldn't make much of a leader without any troops to lead. So he implanted the corpses of Blackout, Barricade, and Devastator with energy leached from these Allspark mutations. An Energon hunt in the rainforest led him to getting worshipped as a god by a local tribe, and what did he do? He set fire to half of the rainforest to cover his escape from the Autobots. Their entire natural habitat up in smoke so he could run away with his tail tucked. He also collapsed a cathedral at one point, but these comics are pretty hard to find, so I don't know if there's anybody in it at the time. Then he blackmailed the US government. Yep, in an alternate reality where Megs won the Battle of Mission City, he implanted Insecticon's Cerebrostrip in the heads of strategically placed humans, then manipulated the government into kicking OP's crew off the planet, then got one of his brainwashed generals to launch a nuke at it.
Glorious Megatron, we are ready to serve.
I am ready to serve as your ever-faithful second-in-command.
In his very first appearance in Transformers Animated, he planted a shatter bomb on Megatron's back.
Yes!
Thought the other cons would thank him for it, but they abandoned him. Then booted Black Arachnia out into space after she proposed a truce with him. Professor Princess put him in makeup and a wig. When he threatened to kill her, she threatened to release pics of him in this state out to the world. So he thought it best to let her go. Yeah, that's probably wise. He found Megs' head, and Megs' fiery revenge is all that stopped him from killing Autobot Bumblebee. And take his revenge he did as he jabbed the Allspark key into his chest and drained him of his Energon. And as a result, he ended up dumped on a garbage barge. His next encounter with Megatron saw him nearly cleaved in half, an encounter that smashed his spark before the other cons threw him off of a cliff and into a river, only being brought back by an Allspark fragment getting stuck in his forehead, a fragment that he reckoned made him immortal. So he went after Megs again and again and again, with Megs beating him or even executing him each time. Now this fragment in his head was the only thing keeping him alive. Bear that in mind. Next, he cloned himself a bunch of times, each of the clones having a different aspect of his personality. Skywarp was his cowardice, Thundercracker had his ego, Sunstorm had his sycophancy, Ramjet had his deceptive side, and Slipstream his effeminate side, I guess, let's put it that way. Anyway, after a couple of failed attempts, the clones overwhelmed and restrained Megatron. And Screaming Boy was about to give him a taste of this here sword before Isaac Sumdac cut his head off in a bid to take control of Starscream's body to beat Megatron himself. Why not just let Starscream kill him? This allowed Megatron the time to get free. Clones sided with him for some reason suddenly, don't know why, before his severed head got glued to the fucking wall and then used as a battery to power this here space bridge. Thing is, it was too much power, the space bridge overloaded and sucked in Megatron and the disembodied head and teleported them to a remote region of space where they bickered a lot.
Is all your
Megs plugged Starscream's head into Omega Supreme, who'd also been sucked into the space bridge, revitalizing Omega and allowing Megatron to bend the Giant to his will. And of course, use the Giant to attack the Autobots. The Autobots managed to place a plasma dynamic thruster onto Omega's body, which caused him, Starscream, and Megsy to start randomly teleporting across the universe. Starscream goaded Lungnut into fighting Shockwave before just rolling on out of there. And finally managed to get a replacement body from his stash of clones, and just in time because Megs arrived and destroyed all of the other bodies, saying that he'd rather see more copies of the infinitely more loyal Lugnut. Deeming Starscream no further use to him, Megatron blasted Starscream's lower body to smithereens with a point-blank round from his fusion cannon, leaving him on the surface of the moon. And eventually, the Allspark fragment keeping him alive got pulled out by Prowl's ninja telekinesis, and he finally dropped down dead for good. But he posthumously got his revenge, as it turned out that he wired large-scale shatter bombs into the Lugnut clones in another attempt to kill Megs. That didn't work either though, so that was a failure too. But apparently there was another scene where Slipstream resurrected him again, using another Allspark shard, but the scene had to be cut for time and budget reasons.
Oh, for Spark's sake.
I can't hear you!
All hail Starscream!
One more time!
We gotta spend a bit of time on Aligned Starscream now. Again, time codes below. Piecing together bits and bobs from the Covenant novel, the War of Cybertron game, and a couple toy bios, you throw all that into a blender and then simplify it. You can safely say he started out as a straight-up honorable citizen, probably with a background in science, who attained the rank of Sky Commander under Sentinel Prime, before starting to work for the Decepticons in secret. Once he got found out, he was demoted and sent to work on the near-derelict Trypticon station that housed Dark Energon, which was kind of a bullshit job because Dark Energon was considered a lost cause because it was way too powerful to actually use. The years of isolation made him grow resentful and jealous and all of the things that we know him to be. This was until Megatron showed up at the beginning of the War for Cybertron game. Even then, he was reluctant to join the cons until he saw that Megatron was able to absorb and manipulate the Dark Energon. He murdered some of his own scientists at Megatron's request, and he didn't seem that bothered about it. And he realized that Dark Energon was addictive, and it's alluded to that he himself was an addict, which prompted him to free Sentinel Prime from his holding. Megs quickly ended him though, so that plan was a fail too. But then he took part in the killing of Omega Supreme in exchange for more of Megsy's Dark Energon. Omega being the last line of defense for Cybertron's core, and without him, Megs was free to poison the entire planet. Then he changed his body, becoming Skinny Scream. He blew off Arcee's arm with a missile, picked it up and battered poor Cliffjumper with it, and with the help of Breakdown, he was about to kill them both, but Prime and B arrived to help out.
Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing!
Sending him fleeing, tail firmly tucked. Obviously, he killed Cliff in the cartoon,
Clean that up.
then turned him into a salivating, bloodthirsty monster with the power of Dark Energon, then blew up a mine that housed his body to try and kill the Autobots that came to rescue him. He strung up and tortured Agent Fowler with a cattle prod, and then got beaten because that delayed Meg's plans, apparently. And then revived Skyquake and tried to make him an ally, but the big bot said he was only loyal to Megs. He had Makeshift impersonate Wheeljack. He delayed recovering Megatron's body even after the cons voted to because they weren't satisfied with his leadership. And when Megs finally did recover, he put Starscream in the infirmary. And then, and this one is typical Starscream, wanted to go and rescue Breakdown when he fell into the clutches of Human Outfit Mech. And before anyone is like, oh, he cares about Breakdown, loyalty, yay.
No.
There's actually a lot of sucking up going on in this scene, and it actually feels like he's just trying to tell Megs what he thinks Megs wants to hear. Megatron said no, saying that it was Breakdown's own fault that he got himself in this situation in the first place. And when Starscream finds out the Bulkhead has put past grievances aside and risked his own life to free Breakdown, Starscream ordered Breakdown to kill him. And Breakdown went for him too. But you know the deal, Autobots arrive, Starscream tucks tails and runs. No sooner had he told Arachnid that he was fiercely loyal to Megatron, was he trying to switch side to the Autobots, even leading them to the immensely powerful Immobilizer. He didn't want to do this for no reason though, but because Arachnid usurped him in the chain of command, then webbed him up and abandoned him. So it's pretty understandable. Unfortunately, he let slip that he'd been the one to kill the Cliffjumper, provoking Arcee and ending up with him stabbing her in the guts. So that plan went up in smoke. Then he was betrayed by Dark Energon. At one point he injects himself and declares himself invulnerable.
No.
For some reason it didn't work and the Autobot showed up and blew his arm off. And after all of this, he declared himself neutral and left.
Aligned with no side. Servant to no one.
Except that only a couple of episodes later, he was allying himself with Mech. Yep, this was the time he almost gave them the means to build their own evil army. They'd just stolen B's T-Cog, leaving him not only unable to speak, but also having to catch the fucking bus. And guess who was on hand to teach them how to install it in their human-made mechs? 'Tis I! Why did he do this? Well, they could locate and synthesize Energon, and he wanted it. But when B showed up looking for his T-Cog, Starscream opted to destroy it and then fled. The Mech guys weren't too happy though. They took his T-Cog instead. I love how he's holding his side like someone just stole his kidney. He cloned himself again, but found that he would feel every wound the clone suffered, which was probably a much needed lesson in empathy for the guy. He ended up killing the last clone. Then he got the Apex armor, which made him more powerful than both Optimus and Dreadwing. Although he was outmaneuvered when Dreadwing planted explosives in the ice, which forced him to have to walk the armor along the bottom of the ocean because it couldn't fly. He laughed at a dancing monkey. He used Red Energon to give himself super speed, which he used to get the Omega Keys. These things had enough power to rejuvenate Cybertron, apparently. He threatened to slit the Autobots' throats and went to puncture Arcee's eye. But luckily, time was against him on both occasions. He then used the Omega Keys to get back in with Megatron. Then he kidnapped the kids, put them in these big jars, and took them to Cybertron as hostages. He slapped Knockout and then shot down Wheeljack's ship and took him in for more interrogation. He tried this one plan of putting a tracker on Jackie, then releasing him, thinking it would lead them back to the Autobots, but Jackie just found the tracker, so that was another massive fail, and it lost them a valuable hostage. Then, he managed to lose the Apex armor to Miko, and a Predacon that he was put in charge of escaped and damaged the Nemesis' comm dish, which probably wouldn't have happened had he not kicked it. When the fusion of Silas and the remains of Breakdown created this nightmare fuel, Starscream had the bright idea of adding Dark Energon to the nightmare cocktail, thinking it would give Megs a super soldier he could control, but instead it just sent the monster crazy and created a plague. This plan actually worked. So you know the Predacons that Shockwave was cloning? Well, the cons realized that they were getting too powerful, so Screamy lured the Autobots into the lab and made it look like they killed all of the clones right in front of Predaking. So either Predaking would kill them or they would kill Predaking, either result being a winner for the cons. He even forgot to tell Shockwave when the Autobots were arriving in the hope that he'd get caught up in it too. And when he saw that Unicron had possessed Megatron's body and wanted to create an undead army, he tucked his tail you know where and skedaddled away in the most cowardly way possible. to free Knockout,
Scream, thank the stars.
who then betrayed him. And once all was said and done, Megs declared that he was no longer interested in bending everyone to his almighty throbbing will, so Starscream was like, okay, leadership time for me. But the Predacons arrived to bite a chunk out of his ass. Now, you would have thought this would have killed Starscream, wouldn't you? But no! Because 2015 Robots in Disguise show how he managed to get out of this situation, telling this embellished story of his great victory, when what we see is that he slapstickly trips over something and a cannon goes off and he gets unbelievably lucky, basically. He upgraded his chassis to a more classic look, I like it, and then started a hunt for weaponized minicons, before he managed to procure the Dark Starsaber. He would later state that his intention was to use the blade and merge with the minicons to kill Megatron and then go put the galaxy under his dominion. He did get all 8 minicons for a short time and turned into this. A form that gave him the power beyond the power of a Prime. He's stronger than a Prime, basically. But one of them managed to get away from him. Yeah, the Sparrow with the really deep voice.
Will you accept the power surge I can provide?
Wait, what the fuck? Was it just me who was surprised the first time this guy spoke? Like, I was expecting him to be like, Optimus, caca! But no, he sounds like he should be singing Chocolate Salty Balls. Anyway, sexy voice Sparrow joined with Optimus, turning him from Beefcake Prime into Beefcake Prime. And there was a fucking epic fight. Ooh! And Starscream, with the power of his 6 minicons, was too fast and too strong for Prime. But they beat him with, you know, the power of love or something. And he was imprisoned for transport back to Cybertron. He captured the President and Air Force One and demanded that Optimus surrender to get him back in exchange.
Which president are we talking about? Oh, him. Fuck him. I'm gonna lay my hammock.
OP beat his Vacons, chopped his arm off, prompting him to tuck tail and skaboodle. In War for Cybertron, he planted a det pack on this guy. You can plant a... What? On his face? Oh no, Starscream! Upon exit, because... Oh no, he's shivering! And in Fall of Cybertron, he rubbed Meg's face in the fact that he managed to best Optimus.
Silence!
And got a blaster fusion cannon for it. Right before Megsy was flattened by a Metroplex slapper hand. He took control of the cons and swiftly ordered a retreat. Nobody trusted him as leader, as he spent all time and resources making statues and paintings of himself, and throwing anyone who opposed him into jail. Then the Autobots managed to get their hands on a huge ship carrying nearly all of the con Energon. And Starscream threw all of his troops at it to get it back, despite the fact that its defenses were fully operational and mowed down a large percentage of con forces. Starscream ordered a retreat, but the Combaticons ignored him and pressed ahead, managing to get back at least some of the Energon. But Starscream twisted the events and blamed them for it, and had them arrested. Then it was time for another coronation, but Megs crashed the party in his newly rebuilt body, and Starscream, you guessed it, tail tucked ran. He was last seen trying to recruit Grimlock from Shockwave's lab, which was another massive fail as the Big G went on an unholy rampage. And what happened to Screamy after that is unknown. In Cyberverse, where he reportedly came from the upper classes, Snoot Scream, he ruined Windblade's game of rugby or football or whatever by reprogramming its AI. He threw Bumblebee's giant foam finger. No! Then he ordered Dirge and Ramjet to kick in his testicles. Well, he used the word circuits, but we both know it means the same thing. He ignored Megatron's calls for air support, deciding it was more important to send forces to raise a force field instead. Protect himself, obviously, leaving Megs holding his dick. Screamy took a beating for this, of course, and Slipstream was given the position of leader of the Seekers. He tried to kill Megs here, and thinking that he was dead, took control of the cons once again, but not before beating up his unconscious body, kicking Soundwave out of the command chair. But again, Megs returned, threw him around like a ragdoll, smashed him with his Energon mace, kicked him in his mouth, stomped on his head, punched him into a wall, punched him into another wall, punched him through this wall, shot him with his fusion cannon, and then after the light finally left his eyes, he dumped him on the moon. And you might think that would have killed him, but no! He was back just a couple of eps later, stealing the Allspark, and used it to give himself some fancy armor, and birth an army of Scraplets, believing them to be reincarnated souls of the ancients. Makes sense? And with his new children, he attacked the Nemesis, draining all of the cons of their Energon, and forcing them to ask the Autobots for help. He kidnapped Cheetor and Bee, planning to forcibly merge Cheetor's spark with his own, I think because Cheetor was the Allspark's chosen one, and yada yada yada. Then he reprogrammed Vector Sigma, and used it to absorb the power of the Allspark, which gave him godlike powers. Then extracted the sparks of his own Seekers. It turned into a proper satanic horror movie here. He was only stopped using the same trick on the remaining Autobots when Optimus brought out Ye Old Faithful.
The Matrix of Leadership.
And then he attempted to have the Autobots destroy each other by sabotaging one of Wheeljack's new Allspark emitters. Of course, he betrayed his whole entire species to the Quintessons to avoid the death penalty, and the Quintessons allowed him to become a judge as a reward. Oh yeah, and then he killed a Titan by teleporting a whole load of unspace onto his head. Basically, Windblade resurrected Ioconus, so he brought in the brainwashed Croaton to counter. Ioconus got the upper hand though, so Starscream killed him. He ordered Croaton to kill everything in the city, but Meg showed up with some fancy new powers he'd learned in another universe, and Windblade freed Croaton's mind. Plus there was the small matter of Megs and Opie both unleashing the power of both their mattresses of leadership, sent him running yet again, running to his death! And eventually his head was recovered by meteor fire and displayed in a collection of alien memorabilia. Earthspark, you know the deal. Megatron's a good guy. Whoop! Starscream fought against him to try and stop him launching the Allspark back through the space bridge and back to Cybertron. Whoop! Opie killed the space bridge and that ended the war. Whoop! Starscream got captured by Ghost and had to sit there watching his friends get experimented on. No whoop. He talked about all the years of abuse he suffered at the hands of Megatron. Grr. Establishing this kind of bond with Hashtag, who he was willing to die for when they later got attacked by this cave creature called the Dweller. But Hashtag saved Starscream and they both escaped. After this, Megatron offered Starscream a safe place to go.
You'll be safe with me, baby.
But Starscream turned him down, teleporting away with Novastorm and Skywarp. Then when Mandroid threatened to kill all of Cybertronian life, he, Novastorm, and Skywarp joined the fight back. So if anything, it was Megatron who betrayed him, and he showed quite a bit of loyalty. In Season 2, things fell back into a more familiar dynamic. Starscream took leadership again in a bid to put together the Shattered Emberstone, and used that to take control of a Titan that had been slumbering under the town of Witwicky, and eventually conquer Earth and make it into New Cybertron. He was pretty much the standard villain again, still angry at Megs for his treason, but any nuance from Season 1 is gone. He did backstab the new Terran called Aftermath. Yeah, he was a Chaos Terran, formed from a corrupted part of the Emberstone that meant he was kind of evil and aligned with the cons. But Screamy turned on him and used this thing called the Cyber Slayer on him and extracted the Emberstone piece that gave him life. He also almost killed all of his crew after he got control of the Titan, and the power went to his head, which led to his whole crew bailing on him. Then the Titan was trapped behind a force field by the Malto kids and had her spark cleanse in what was a little bit of a letdown of an ending, I gotta admit. One thing I really don't get is how Quintus Prime, the first time, left the Emberstone under the protection of this hulking Great Titan, and then the second time, under the protection of these two random kids. I don't know, maybe I missed something. Then there was the Transformers 1 incarnation, who again turned against the establishment after Sentinel betrayed the Primes, so he set up a group to sabotage Sentinel's rule. He was a firm believer in the rule of the strong over the weak, which kind of backfired the moment that someone stronger and angrier than him came along. Megs crushed his throat in this one, giving him that famous high-pitched tone of voice in a nod to G1, before Screamy started begging for mercy. But it was only Optimus insisting that he be allowed to live which cooled Megatron's tits. He got captured by Sentinel's forces, and Sentinel made fun of his voice. And he was the first to shout, "All hail Megatron," once Sentinel was, defeated, let's just put it that way. Then there was the Japanese Beast Wars 2, where he and his Duocon partner BB were rivals with Galvatron's brother Megastorm for the number 2 spot in the hierarchy. So Starscream lied to him. "This stuff will make you more powerful, just throw yourself into a pit of it." Obviously with the hope that that would kill his rival off, but that was a fail too, as that just turned him into Gigastorm and made him even more powerful. This one time he witnessed Megastorm trying to kill Galvatron by trying to shove him into a volcano, and Starscream stepped in and saved him, but only as a way of snitching on the competition. Then he tried to frame the Maximals for trapping the Insectrons in Energy Net, even ordering BB to shoot down their own guys to persuade the Insectrons that they were the good guys, which led to a battle between the Maximals and the Insectrons. Then he tried to collapse a ravine on both groups. Then he started roofying people. Yeah, so first he made a little kawaii hologram of himself inviting the Insectrons to an oil party, then spiked the Insectrons' oil to make the Insectrons extra intoxicated, hoping that they would fight and destroy each other. The plan was foiled when Galvatron drank the oil and got shit-faced and caused even more drunken chaos. Then Gigastorm found out that Starscream tried to kill him earlier with a pit of Anglemoy energy. So Gigastorm set off a bunch of explosives, but somehow Starscream and BB survived and were transformed into Hellscream and Max B. And this wouldn't be a genuine Starscream if he didn't offer to switch sides. He was less of a sycophantic suck-up in Armada, and all the sickly praise that he heaped on Megs
Under your great leadership, there is no chance that the Autobots will be able to beat us.
Wasn't fake like other incarnations of the character. This guy genuinely adored his leader, but kept getting slapped down for it. I mean, he did mess up a lot as well.
This is your fault, Starscream.
but that was mostly coming from his desperation to get a Minicon. Like here, he showed up to a battle and messed the whole thing up, meaning that Prime got a Minicon instead of Megatron, but Megatron's reactions and punishments were completely out of proportion. Like this one time where Starscream got hold of the Starsaber, but Megatron engineered a situation in all this thick fog where Starscream mistook Demolisher for an Autobot and nearly cut him in half, meaning that Starscream had to give the weapon to Megatron as a punishment. But it's the way that Megatron did this that was just downright creepy. Instead of just ordering him to hand the weapon over, he manipulated the other cons into hating Starscream, and then they pressured him to give it up, while he was like,
"If you want me to, I will take the Starsaber. I only want what's best for the Decepticons."
He'd blame him for losing battles, even when he followed orders to the letter, and began brutalizing him upon their return to the base. And Demolisher and Sideways had to stop Megs from killing him. He challenged Megs to a duel to save face, and he held his own pretty well, but Megs came out on top in the end, wanting Starscream to beg for his life. Then he was used as a decoy and then abandoned again.
Why have you all abandoned me?
All this led up to him finally losing his mind and going on a sword-swishing rampage through the Decepticon base, and eventually defecting to the Autobot, giving them inside intel as a show of goodwill. Information they used to launch an assault on the Con's moon base, so that was a pretty big betrayal, even though totally justified. Roundabout here, he bonded with squishy human Alexis, where she thanked him for risking his life for them and tried to set him at ease with joining the Autobots. In return, he gave her a Mars rock as a souvenir. The kids even threw him a welcome to the good guys party, baked him a cake, and gave him a homemade blanket of friendship. Yes, a blanket, which I guess is supposedly to polish the Starsaber rather than keep him cozy at night. But it's all irrelevant because the fucker threw it out of a window or something shortly after. Interestingly though, he says that this is the first gift he ever received. So what's that tell you? He was persuaded back to the cons shortly after this though, but swore to never forget his human friends. His undefection? Meant that the cons now had all 3 Minicon weapons though, which would all come together in a planet-destroying weapon called the Hydra Cannon. And when the time did come to fire the weapon, guess who Megs got to pull the trigger?
Kill your friends!
Fortunately, Optimus Prime and Jetfire attacked the cannon before he had to press the big red button, and Starscream was ordered out into space to counter them. He saved Prime here.
What are you doing, you idiot?
Who then blocked the Hydra Cannon's massive blast to save Earth and died as a result. He did seem to regret Prime's demise though, but left with the other cons back to Cybertron all the same. He got repainted blue.
It looked like Thundercracker.
He was the first to see Thrust's betrayal in the wake of a black hole mysteriously appearing in orbit around Cybertron. Thrust, of course, being a servant of the incoming Unicron. Thrust messed up though when he threatened Alexis and the other kids, so Starscream went to slap him, but was caught by a blast of the Requiem blaster and killed. Luckily, Highwire could rewind time and interfered with Thrust's aim, saving Starscream's life. Later, he had to risk his life to recover Alexis's necklace, which she said was very important to her because she made it from the Mars rock he gave her earlier. Then they realized that Unicron the Chaos Bringer was about to get his chow down, so he put his doubts aside, joined forces with the Autobots, and beckoned the other cons to do the same. They believed that it was some kind of Autobot deception though, and Starscream realized that he would have to force Unicron to reveal himself, and that would mean him sacrificing his own life. So he jumped into the middle of a battle between Megs and Opie and baited Unicron into unleashing a blast of energy that literally crumbled him to ash. As a result, Megatron saw the devastation that Unicron could unleash and agreed to join up with Opie and the Autobots to fight him. This was possibly Starscream's greatest ever storyline. And surely that would have killed him!
Here he comes! Here he comes! Starscream!
Because he was recreated by Alpha Q in Transformers Energon, but without his memories and without a proper body, as he kept shifting between a physical and energy being form. This form allowed him to teleport, but also stalk people while invisible. He blasted Prime and believed him to be dead, and snuck up on Megs and stabbed him with a sword. But that failed too, as Megs got some Unicron magic and unleashed a whole bunch of torment on poor old Screamy. This wiped all memories of Alpha Q, and then he rejoined the cons. Damn, his mind must be an absolute mess. He attempted to kidnap Kicker, which he probably wouldn't have done had he known how annoying he was. And long story short, he realized that Megatron had been taken over by Unicron's consciousness, and he turned into a planet-sized Titan. So Opie did the same, and ended with Megs or Galvatron managing to regain enough mental control of himself to throw himself into a nearby star. And although Starscream is last seen being told to stand down and stay out of Galvatron's way, he's later reported missing, and it's said that he might have followed his leader into the fiery death in the star.
Loyalty!
And you would have thought that would have killed him.
But no!
Because eventually the star died and turned into a black hole, releasing Meggs and Starscream, who regained his personality and now had the goal of overthrowing Meggs once and for all. First, helping Meggs to track down the Omega Lock and the Cyber Planet keys before trapping him in a giant metallic sphere.
Don't worry, I'm in charge now.
Starscream, you traitor!
Then freeing the ancient Decepticons. They were the disembodied sparks of these cons that disguised themselves as monsters in Earth's ancient history, giving rise to many of our myths and legends. And Starscream took them as his own personal army. Then he stole the Omega Lock and Cyber Planet keys in one instance, firing a missile at these kids to stop Optimus from getting the Earth key, knowing the Big Red would prioritize the kids over the artifact.
It's mine at last.
And channeled from them the power of Primus, transforming himself into a skyscraper-sized giant, which also gave him his crown back, before he made himself even bigger by jumping into a beam of Primus's energy, attaining Unicron-like proportions, and fighting his own god Primus one-on-one. Basically, Primus made these giant flails out of Cybertron's moons. And he's sent crashing down into this planetary surface. The whole thing explodes, and he shrinks back down to normal proportions because of all his energy being drained. Then came the final battle with Megatron on planet Gigantion, where both channeled unprecedented levels of energy, and it's said that so much energy was released when they both collided that space and time itself was warped by the final explosion, and Starscream disappeared in a reality-sundering discharge of energy, apparently swept away across the dimensions, leaving only his crown. Galvatron was fine. In the War for Cybertron cartoon, he was a bit cheeky to leader of the Seekers, Jetfire, so Jetfire lopped his hand off. He got a chance for revenge when Jetfire turned coat.
I told you, he's a traitor.
And Meggs ordered Starscream to hunt him down, resulting in his promotion to leader of the Seekers. He killed Impactor. Remember, Impactor was a con in this one. Then lured Elita 1 and her team into a trap that she narrowly escaped from. He was quick to announce Megatron's death and tried to take control of the faction. And when Meggs showed up again, Starscream accused him of collaborating with the enemy. You can probably guess what happened. So he got back on board the Nemesis and opened fire on the space station that Meggs was on, blowing it and apparently Megatron to absolute smithereens. Meggs was fine though. And then in Earthrise, he made an alliance with Black Arachnia and Dinobot, and threw the latter off of a cliff. Interestingly, in the lead up to this, Dinobot had just put it to him that he had been using all of his abuses as an excuse for all of the atrocities that he'd committed. I guess the truth hurt, because look at how he reacted. The IDW incarnation saw his newborn spark being placed in a mass-produced generic body type, which might have been the root of a yearning to stand out and be special in some way.
I'm special!
But definitely meaning that he would often change his body, with it being theorized that he was trying to find the right body to match his personality. Anyway, he studied at the Nova Point Academy before becoming a senator. Perfect job, right? Scheming, manipulation, and of course he abused his position and embezzled loads of money. He conned Thundercracker and Skywarp into being body doubles in case anyone came looking for the money. Then he turned on his fellow senators and executed a whole bunch of them. This was when Meggs pulled his coup, obviously. And it was even him who gave Meggs the iconic fusion cannon. I guess not realizing that he would be looking down the barrel of this thing more than anyone else. He got Needle Nose and Horrible to carry a booby trap shipment of weapons to try and kill Opie, Jetfire, and Prowl, even though the explosion would have probably killed his own guys as well. He tortured Bumblebee, before conspiring with Scorponok to banish Meggs to planet Junkion. Scorponok's rules didn't go so well, and he had to blow up half the planet's Energon. And of course, Meggs came back and he was pissed! Starscream managed to bootlick his way out of the whole situation. He allied his group with Vectral, the leader of the Dire Wraiths, mainly to get his Energon synthesizer. Then massacred a company of Galactic Council soldiers. He pulled this guy's breathing mask off to see if he was organic or not, not caring if the atmosphere would kill him. I mean, it didn't matter anyway. But in the end, he was betrayed as Vectral turned on him. Oh, and Stardrive gave him a beating and ripped his wings off. The Infiltration comic saw him in a key role to destabilize Earth's governments and power structures. He used some of Shockwave's ores to take himself to over 9,000, but it still wasn't enough to beat Meggs, and he got a massive hole blasted through his chest. The two would come back together to fight these super powerful aliens called Reapers. He influenced Autobot Sunstreaker into an alliance that would see them both overthrow Megatron. But surprise, surprise, that turned out to be a ruse, which led Sunstreaker's group into a trap. After the Autobots were trapped on Cybertron, the cons made a push to take Earth. Earth, and Starscream spearheaded the attack on New York, shot down Air Force One, before Megatron called a con victory. And it was in this pensive moment that Starscream received some rare positive words from Megatron, in short acknowledging that he'd been at his side since the very beginning, and telling him that his qualities meant that he was actually the embodiment of the Decepticon cause, and it was only his ego that meant that he wasn't accomplishing it. That's my read on it anyway. Then Megatron took a pause to savor his victory.
Ah, the smell of burning human.
But Starscream grew frustrated because he wanted to push on and continue the conquest. So he weaved the narrative that Megs didn't have a plan beyond Earth and used that to recruit the Constructicons and the Insecticons for another coup. Before he could set it into full swing though, Megs caught onto the plan, but had a more measured response this time, telling Scream that he would get his turn to lead the cons one day. So Starscream kind of accepted his place and rallied the troops against the returning Autobots. Megs did get his ass handed to him though, and Starscream led the cons as they scurried back into space. After this, he actually did get leadership of the cons, and it was a shit show. Of course, he tried to persuade Soundwave to offline Megs rather than keeping him on life support. He had the matrix of leadership, but obviously couldn't use it, although it did get him a little respect. He tasked Shockwave to build a space bridge, but that took up all their energon. His troops were either damaged or starving, so they started cannibalizing each other, and that's all before Megs was brought back in an upgraded new body, and viciously pissed off with what Starscream had allowed to become of his faction. Megs gave him one of the worst beatings I've ever seen him get, before he wimpishly decided to fall back into the fold of the cons again. He was forced to combine into the Devoid's avatar, the Decepticon, and once this thing was beaten, the cons were rounded up, arrested, and fitted with control chips by Prowl, and Ratbat emerged as the voice of the cons.
Fuck's sake, I have to overthrow this guy now!
And you know what happens whenever there's a new leader of the cons, right? Well, Prowl and RC got there first, but he launched himself into politics, starting a political campaign to rule not just the cons, but all Cybertronians. Now, I won't go into every single detail here because there's a hell of a lot, but in short, he latched onto an ancient prophecy, the prophecy of the Chosen One, to paint himself as the new Robo-Jesus, even though he didn't believe the prophecy himself. He tried to get influential allies like Bumblebee, but he didn't trust him, so he zapped him with a prod. Before Megs showed up again, ruined his plans, dragged him through the streets, and generally f***ed shit up. And amidst the chaos, Starscream saw an opportunity. After splitting Turmoil's head, he turned to Metalhawk, who spluttered, "I thought we were friends." And Starscream said, "We are, I just want this more," before gunning him down. This was after Metalhawk had just saved Starscream from Megs. He blamed the constant factional fighting for Metalhawk's death and persuaded the citizens to abandon their allegiances, and astonishingly they agreed for him to be leader. And so began the reign of Starscream. On one hand, delicately balancing the Autobots and the cons, on another protecting from outside threats like Shockwave's Ammonite army, and still finding time for the odd betrayal, like the position of influence he promised Onslaught.
Position of what now?
But all that said, he still had grander plans. To expand his rule into a galaxy-spanning empire. And how would he do this? Deception, of course. First, he wanted to put planet Caminus under Cybertron's protection. So he engineered a situation where Menasor would attack Caminus, allowing him to swoop in with Superion and save the day, thus securing the admiration of the Camians. His plan backfired, Menasor was too crazy, leading to widespread death and destruction, all while he was picking out outfits for himself. And Optimus came in and stole his thunder anyway. And if you thought that was a Combiner mess, wait till you hear about the time he inadvertently triggered a Combiner war. He was trying to get the Constructicons back on his side when Menasor escaped, so Starscream sent in Devastator to bring Menasor under control. But Defensor obviously didn't get the memo, because he attacked Devastator thinking he was evil, Superion gets involved, and before you know it, we've got a Combiner rumble with unprecedented collaterals. They end up falling through this space bridge, tumbling from weird world to weird world, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake, before Optimus, Maximus, Superion, and Defensor finally managed to pull Devastator apart into his component bots. Menasor got knocked out, I think, but then Starscream arrested the Constructicons. Also Prowl had committed a load of crimes at this stage, but it was probably also to prevent the Autobots from forming Optimus Maximus. Anyway, he brought in his own Gestapo called the Badgeless, used them to take political prisoners, had Windblade tortured when he thought she was trying to undermine his authority, before he tried to add Velocitron to his Council of Worlds. Knockout and Moonracer didn't want to join though. They would later join after Blur won this race. It was this whole thing. Then they got Devician to sign up, a planet of these tiny twin mini-bots. Then it was the turn of Beast Planet Eucharis. These guys hated the vehicle mode guys. And when their Titan Sheila found out there were vehicles on his rock, he went nuts. So Starscream killed him. Yep, he saw this majestic giant gold pheasant or whatever, flew into its head and shot it in its brain. Then he threw one of his badgeless under the bus when he knew he was innocent. The one badgeless that couldn't possibly look any more like a teddy bear even if he was covered in fur and named Pugsy Wuggum's face.
Guilty!
There was this whole thing with Arachnid. He got her to use her brain probing talents to peer into Bot's minds because he wanted to find the body of Swindle. Unfortunately, Arachnid's process was fatal to whoever was being probed, so a lot of people died. Might do a spotlight video on Arachnid next, actually, so stay tuned for that. The reason he wanted to find Swindle was to get the Combaticons back under his control and ensure their loyalty. So another thing he did to this end was manipulate Blastoff, who was in love with Onslaught. So Starscream offered to tinker with Onslaught's mind so that he would notice Blastoff. So how could Blastoff refuse? He commissioned Thundercracker to make a movie about him, told him it was great, then ordered his troops to kill him. Maybe he didn't find it so great. He did help in the battle against Sentinel Prime and his army of undead titans, and he did agree to call Cybertron's first free elections. And in his first debate against Windblade, her opening speech stirred him so much that he realized that she should, in fact, be leader. And instead of making his speech, he just confessed to every single crime that he had committed. And it was a long list. So he was sentenced to life in prison, but was broken out by Devastator and asked to lead again when giant evil f***ing eyeball titan Nemesis appeared in the sky, led by Onyx Prime and the Prime of Lies, Liege Maximo. Of course, this would turn out to be Shockwave, who unveiled his master plan to have Unicron cleanse Cybertron. He also revealed that the Chosen One prophecy had been deliberately seeded by him in the past to make sure that events unfolded in this exact way. At one point, Shockwave said that he would let Starscream rule his new Cybertron, but Starscream refused. So in retaliation, Shockwave told him that the reason he allowed him to rule in the first place was that he needed a fool in charge. Because a strong leader like Primal Megs would have seen his plan coming, whereas Screamy was too absorbed in himself to even notice. He threw his fleet of planet killer ships at Unicron, but they were pretty ineffective. So he reverted to type for a moment and started to talk about turning tail and running, abandoning those left on Cybertron. Soundwave wasn't happy about this, so he broadcast Starscream's words to the whole planet, which caused a mass panic. In the end, he didn't run though, instead reuniting with Skywarp and Thundercracker one last time before he would sacrifice himself and be consumed by the energies of the WMD known as the Talisman. It is a great ending. Oh, and I know there's stuff that I'm having to leave out. You know, you can always get in the comments and fill in some of the blanks if you feel like it, but we gotta move on. So let's talk about the time he blew Sea Spray to pieces. This was in the Find Your Fate books, and in another of them, he attempted to poison a city's water supply. In the PDTF comics, he thought he found the fabled black balls. Many jokes to be had here, but you know what? They were just like Dragon Balls. Let's just leave it there. But they turned out to be bombs, you know, like those ones from the old cartoons, and they blew up right in his and Meg's faces, so Megs strangled him. Of course, scientists tried to duplicate his immortal spark and wound up creating Protoform X in Beast Wars, but his ghost got properly involved in the Beast Wars at one point, where he possessed Waspinator.
Waspinator in pain, but still functional.
And actually managed to get control of the Maximal's ship, the Axelon, as well as taking Primal and Dinobot as hostages.
Attention, fools! The Raptor and the Ape are my prisoners!
But the Maximals escaped and fought off the cons. He, yep, you guessed it, turned tail without even a glimpse over his shoulder to see what happened to Black Arachnia, who he had just taken on as a sort of apprentice. She got her revenge, though, when Primal cornered him and he tried to weasel out of the situation. So she blew up the whole place and forced his ghost out of Waspinator's body.
Waspinator has a headache in his whole body.
And out into space. He got a cool new color scheme before horribly scarring Snake Eyes in one of the G.I. Joe crossovers. Then he shot Megatron in the chest, right in the middle of a battle with Optimus. But you can guess what happened there. This was all before Cobra stuffed his body full of explosives, blowing him to dust, as well as the whole Decepticon headquarters. Hearts of Steel saw the bots arriving on Earth in the prehistoric age, meaning that he had a beast mode, some kind of reptilian flying creature. He manipulated an inventor called Tobias Muldoon to design new alt modes for the cons, as well as a new base, before Toby over here heard his plan about making the human race into his slaves.
Stop thinking aloud.
This was before Astrotrain was derailed by Bumblebee while Starscream was inside him. He ripped Bumblebee's head off and presented it to Megs as a trophy, and once again displayed his Knight immortality in the Evangelion crossover after his body was destroyed by Unicron, but his ghost endured and he possessed an angel to become Angel Scream. And Prime was forced to merge with Eva 01 to counter him. His dance got booed in the Creo dance competition. I mean, I've seen worse. But the judges gave him a good score anyhow, I guess because they were all conned. Then he pushed a big old rock into the road to impede Bumblebee, but it hit Megs instead. In the Angry Birds crossover, he was part of an attack on an Autobot shuttle that was going pretty well until he made a grab for the Matrix in an attempt to take it for himself, and accidentally blasted open a window, and the Matrix was sucked out into a quantum tunnel and into the Bird universe, where it became an egg. The pigs found it, and one of them touched it and became, guess what? Pig Scream. Yep, well, Starscream Pig, technically. But he got captured pretty quick, but his rescue mission was aborted by Blue Streak, and he was left to his own devices against these egg bots, who trampled him before snatching the egg for himself and getting really, really, really big. Luckily, one of the birds had a giant slingshot and catapulted him into space, where he reverted to his original pig form.
Starscream, can't you ever just stay dead?
In the Prime Wars trilogy, he once again slithered his way into the ruling council with the secret ambition to obtain the Enigma of Combination. He sent Computron on a mission to stop a rampaging Menasor, a crappy judgment call that wound up getting Computron unalived. Megs shot him again before the warring combiners made the Mistress of Flame suggest using the Enigma, a plan that Starscream gladly agreed to, and there it is, and enable him to absorb the combiners to become this. Whilst in this state, he did this to Megs. And then, just as it seemed he would transcend to being the ultimate super being, he turned into a big, giant, screaming head. And yeah, no offense to the voice actor here, but this is literally the worst sound that's ever tickled my fucking ear. It might even be worse than that fart sound. Do you remember that one? I'll see if I can... Eventually being crushed by Metroplex. In a post-mortem, Perceptor found that his body somehow took on properties akin to the Enigma and the Matrix themselves. And when his spark left his body this time, it gravitated and was absorbed by the body of Dino Titan Trypticon. It seemed like he didn't particularly enjoy this one though, as after he was defeated by the power of the Matrix, he said he felt reborn, as if freed from a great burden. He put Decepticon Leader on his Tinder profile. Oh, and yeah, he had a Tinder profile, yeah. On robot dating site Plenty of Bots, his handle was Looking for Love 84. In the Star Trek crossover, he manipulated a Klingon commander into putting a cloaking device in his body, before he asked Soundwave to record the screams of terrorized humans so that he could play it over and over again, perhaps for sexual pleasure. There, I said it. Before using the cloaking device to flee when Fort Max showed up to put his boot up some ass. He then set about taking over the Klingon homeworld Kronos, killing Gorkon with his Null Ray. But once again, Meg showed up, kicked in his Robonuts, and handed him to the Klingons to do with as they pleased. Oh my god, what is happening? To do with as they please. There was a GoBots comic when he was created when a bot called Road Ranger used remains of other deceased bots like Leader 1 and Psykill. Psykill was this bot who was once good but allowed his ego to take over and become an evil warlord. Leader 1 transformed into an F-15, so you can see how, these two came together into Starscream. He ended up in Mazinger Z's universe after all the bots and cons fell through a portal. Well, I say fell through, but it turned out that the Go Nagai, these mysterious beings, had engineered the whole thing. Anyway, Megs teamed up with Dr. Hell, and Optimus shot Starscream out of the sky. He told Devastator to hold Mazinger in place so that he could shoot the kid in his cockpit. But again, and possibly because of his immortal spark, was able to absorb the near magical photon power, and assimilated Mazinger's body parts to become supervillain Mazinscream, and went on an all-decimating rampage, blowing friend and foe alike to pieces. I forgot a word. And once again, only an alliance between Autobots, Cons, and Mazinger, and whatever in the holy mighty dungeon Salazar's butt. This guy has all the faces. He has a globalized monopoly on ugly. If this guy grabbed my thigh, I would fire hose diarrhea out of all of my bodily openings. Was enough to overcome him. In the 2019 IDW continuity, he stumbled upon a conspiracy involving Sentinel Prime, where he was hoarding Titan sparks instead of letting them mature. So Sentinel made him head of intelligence to ensure his silence. So he began building a network of spies and snitches, eventually coming to control all of the information flow, and would handpick what he thought Sentinel should hear so that he could sway him this way or that way if need be. Once Megatron emerged, he offered to supply him with information, but his arrogant attitude quickly annoyed Megs, and he ordered Soundwave to do his Soundwave thing. And then threatened to blow him in half. And it was clear that Starscream was going to become his ally. Sentinel ordered Optimus to kill Starscream, so he went into hiding. Then there was this weird Halloween special where he was about to kill a Voin ape that he'd found, when some mystical energy transplanted his personality into the body of the monkey, and there was another personality in there too, his old mentor called Cryak, who had gone crazy and wanted to use Starscream's body to go on an unholy killing spree. Yeah. Starscream decided to keep her trapped in the monkey. Pew pew bang bang boom boom. And I guess this is why they tell you not to feed the monkeys at the zoo, man. You never know when there's going to be the spirits of angry transforming robots in. So, Ghostbusters crossover. Autobots leave Earth on the Ark, but before the cons can follow, Gozer appears. And guess who provides the image of their Destructor? And yes, he's always thinking of himself, so... And the Destructor destroyed Cybertron. Before Kremzik transformed the real Starscream into a ghost and used him as a scout to find the Allspark. He lied to the Ghostbusters and conned them into thinking he was a good guy. Then he failed to kill Slimer, then got put in a trap by Peter Venkman before he and the other cons were freed by a ghost called Kilowatt. Get it? Kilowatt, like electricity. He tried to kill Venkman before getting snarled up in a proton beam, so he called Kremzik for help, only to have the entity absorb him. To be fair, if I'd have seen this thing lifting up its cape like that, absorption would have been the least of my worries. Kremzik was taken out by Kilowatt in the end, and the Autobots and the cons went back to fighting each other. He took off as usual, swearing revenge, and when Ectotron left to explore new galaxies, his ghost followed him, waiting for his moment to take said revenge. Then he tried to get a Terminator to help kill Megs. Now, I've spoken about the Terminator crossover before, but essentially it starts in the Ark like what we're all familiar with, but this time the cons wake up first and murder the slumbering Autobots. This meant that they could take over Earth unopposed and push humanity to the brink of total extinction. Skynet managed to get a T-800 to go back to 1984 to stop Megs from killing the Autobots. Having no idea what this thing was, Starscream interrogated a bunch of scientists to find out more about the T-800 and tried to make a deal with the machine itself, threatening to kill these hostages if it didn't comply and help him kill Megatron. T-800 didn't give a f though. Obviously, this plot to kill Megatron failed too, and Starscream took his ass the hell out of there as per usual. He forced some ponies to work on his outfit in the My Little Pony crossover. He also called the Autobots Autobums! No! Before he got tangled up in his own cape and crashed. He had to unite with the Autobots again to face King Sombra and his own Seekers allied with the Wonderbolts. And when he ordered a mass bombing of the enemy, the ponies thought it was too violent and ordered that they trap them in nets instead. Much nicer. And when that was done, he gave a big villain monologue about how they would all serve him one day.
Stop thinking aloud.
Then he tried to kill Megs with this, and this is actually one of the ponies in a transformed exosuit. Megatron saw the attack coming though, thanks to the power of rainbow sprinkles or whatever, and tried to blast him with his fusion cannon. He nearly killed Marty McFly in the Back to the Future crossover, but the DeLorean flew in and saved him, turning out to be an Autobot called Gigawatt, and sent Starscream crashing into a building full of fertilizer.
I hate manure!
He kicked Gigawatt in the nuts! He oversaw the enslavement of the residents of Hill Valley and their back-breaking labor to extract Energon under the watch of Biff Tannen. These two kept them enslaved for over 30 years. Later, he and the Constructicons would be seen organizing an execution of human rebels. But Marty put a stop to that, and Starscream got steel knuckles for lunch from Rodimus Prime. Oh yeah, he also got a garbage can lid thrown at his head and kicked in the face by Marty's skateboard when he turned out to be a Transformer. And he was last seen lying in a pile of garbage. At least I think that was his last appearance. I couldn't see him at all in the last issue. Alright, you guys, I gotta wrap this up. This has been a long one. But how to summarize one of the most complicated characters in Transformers? Well, I'm not sure that we should. I quite like him being this perplexing melting pot with all these different sides to him that all come together in this erratic mess that we know as Starscream. I might do further videos further down the line isolating various aspects of his character, but here I wanted to give you the full range, or as much as I could manage anyway, so that you could judge for yourself. Anyway, if anyone is still watching at this point, wow, and thank you for coming on this journey with me. Make sure you're staying tuned to the channel for loads more awesome stuff, most notably a spotlight video on Megatron.
I don't like that.
And of course, make sure you're letting me know if there's anything you want to see. And I will see you very soon for the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and cheerio, bye!